you'll be astounded by what comes out of that conversation. I think that's the place to start, because the more you do it, you build up a bit of a muscle and routine around looking after your social well-being.
Hi, I'm Jo Clark, and thanks so much for joining me today. This is the Redefining Midlife podcast, a podcast designed for the 40-plus woman who is determined to challenge society's myths and beliefs around midlife. It's for the woman who is inspired and ready to define midlife her way. Join me each week as I chat to health and wellness experts for up-to-date information on how to live well as some special conversations with incredible everyday women redefining what midlife can look like. Here's to making our next half of life even better than the first. After a few weeks away on an amazing holiday, I'm really excited to be back behind the microphone to share more special episodes with you. Now, it's hard to believe that for me, this is episode 97, and I'm so very close to recording the 100th episode. To help me celebrate, I would really love it if you could just take a moment of your time to rate and review this podcast on Apple and or Spotify. Just by doing that small, simple task, you actually help this podcast reach more midlife women just like yourself. And it would mean the world to me and really would be the best gift that I could receive to mark this special moment. Now, in this episode, number 97, you're going to meet the very talented Natalie Yan-Chatonsky. Now, we could have chatted for ages, and in fact, Nat and I are planning another episode to further explore some of the things that came up during our conversation. Like me, Nat is passionate about supporting women during this special phase of life. She's the author of The Art of Full-Time Living, which is a book for midlife women to design a meaningful and connected life. Natalie also collaborates with visionary leaders to design experiences and services that support women through midlife transitions. And driven by curiosity about how women can thrive at all life and career stages, Natalie has interviewed hundreds of women and carried out study tours to intergenerational communities, including the Blue Zones. She's discovered that social connections are vital, not only for our transitions, but is an essential ingredient to our vitality in old age. Today, Natalie is dedicated to empowering women to make informed choices about their work, lives, and play, enabling them to thrive within supportive communities and promote better health and financial outcomes. Get ready for a very special conversation. A very big welcome to the podcast, Natalie, and it's so lovely to have you join us today.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Redefining Midlife. It's an absolute joy to talk to you and your audience.
We've got a lot of different topics that we can talk about today, and I know women are going to take something, every woman is going to take something different from our conversation today. So we'll get straight into it. During our chat, we're going to be talking about your work in the area of diversity, particularly around creating social change for midlife and for older women. But before we get into that, I'd love to learn a little bit more about my guests and find out where they got to where they are today. So, Natalie, we're going to turn the clock back a little moment, and you're going to take us to your earlier years. So firstly, where did you grow up and what was life like for young Natalie?
I grew up on the upper North Shore of Sydney in a very bushy area. So my parents literally bought the land when it was, very bushy and built their dream family home. And so my childhood was filled with playing in the backyard, with dirt, climbing trees just before going to school, because the bus stop was literally just in front of the piece of bushland. And I would wake up to the sound of magpies squawking outside my bedroom window. I guess that's probably why I really love my current inner city life of being able to see the bright lights of Sydney, because as much as that sounds really idyllic, great for a childhood, but I love the vibe of lots of people, hustle and bustle. So I guess as a child, it was very serene and filled with nature.
Lovely. And did you have siblings as well, Natalie?
Yeah, so I've got a younger brother who's 5 years younger, and he now lives in New York.
Oh, wow. Oh, great place that you can visit then. Perfect. Well done.
Absolutely.
Now, did you leave school with a clear plan and dreams for the future, or is it something that you just went from just trial and error like a lot of people do?
I was really clear that when I was at school, I wanted to be an architect.
Uh-huh.
And I did work experience in Year 10 with an architectural firm, and that was always my dream. And when I finished high school, got into architecture. But on my year off, I had a gap year going on exchange to Japan, and I had a homestay through the Rotary Exchange program. And during that 1 year, I had so much contact with all these international students from around the world. And I decided that I didn't want to be an architect anymore. I wanted to get into diplomacy because I wanted to make a difference to the world and connect with people from different cultures.
That's amazing then. Well done you, because that's a great thing about travel, isn't it? That you get to see and have experiences, you chat to different people. And how did your family take the fact that, you had a set career path? And it sometimes can be hard because parents can be very invested in their children's future and what they decide to do, to come home and go, I'm going to do something completely different.
Yeah, surprisingly, they were fully supportive of the sudden shift. I guess I brought them on the journey over the course of that life-changing year in Japan. They knew that I'd made a lot of friends, that my world had opened. So it made sense to them. Interestingly, I didn't become a diplomat, but I did come back to Sydney and I did my first degree, which was an Arts Asian Studies degree at Sydney Uni. And that then took me places that I probably couldn't have designed when I was at school because I would have had no knowledge around the workplace and what sort of opportunities were there. So I proceeded to then go on to spend more time in Japan in my third year of uni, and having those Japanese skills were really important in the role that I had in marketing for a multinational tech company that needed someone to be able to speak Japanese with the headquarters in Japan.
Oh, what a great experience.
It was amazing. I'm so lucky to have that experience when I start off my career, to be able to use my Japanese and Chinese language skills and be able to, be the interface with all our different Asia Pacific teams.
Yes. And had you studied Japanese specifically when you were through school, or?
Yeah, it was my favourite subject. So I guess the main learning from that is just go with what you're really passionate about, and that will motivate you to keep pushing through. And even when it gets hard, it can lead you to these amazing opportunities that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Oh, so for a young 20-year-old, you were in your 20s, obviously, by this stage over in Japan. And how long were you staying over there for?
I had 2 years all up. So there was the first year straight after school and another year in my third year of uni. And then subsequently through work, just have been going backwards and forwards from Japan.
Oh, that's amazing. So out of all of the jobs that you've had, it's led you to this point in time and what you're doing now. So I'd love you to share a little bit more about your career path with us today. So you had your time in Japan, and then what sort of other jobs did you get into?
So that opportunity when I first finished my degree in Arts Asian Studies and having majored in Japanese and my Japanese language skills really opened up the door to go and work for IBM, and being in its headquarters, but Sydney-based, enabled me to really get my head around tech and digital, which then opened up my eyes to the things that digital was actually starting to really enable people to do things efficiently and in a more personalised way. So that then opened up a whole lot of opportunities in being a pioneer in the digital industry. And I went on to work for a digital company and was a product manager. So tech and I guess digital disruption has been a bit of a core part of my career. I've since worked with lots of different industries where it's always thinking about the future and building for future markets and business needs. And, went on to do product management consulting and have worked on lots of major initiatives that have been quite important in, pivotal parts of the tech journey in Australia. And I guess the last corporate job that I had about 7 or 8 years ago was digitising the payment system. And while I was in that role, I saw that change is really difficult for people on a personal level to really grasp when they're at that later stage in their careers and in life. And that also paralleled with some family conversations that I was having with my parents around, well, what does it mean to retire meaningfully? So it was kind of all these different things that are going on in the people I got to meet and interview in my job through my work, and then also these private conversations that I was having with my parents that got me thinking about, well, what does the second half of life look like, and how do you transition well into retirement? And what does retirement even mean these days, given that our health span and lifespan has extended so much more with our generation?
That's great, because you've had a beautiful blend of the technology side, but also that personalised the conversations. That's the key part that's often missing, isn't it? That's either one or the other, but you've got a lovely blend of the two. So that's given you a great insight.
Yeah, like I get inspiration from lots of different parts of my life, and I've got so many different interests and different networks. And over the last few years, the more I've researched what it means to live well and the importance of social connections and being part of a community, I've really invested lots of time in making sure that I'm surrounded by lots of different people who can inspire me in different ways and also enable me to think differently about where I'm going and where I'm taking my business, so that I'm not blindsided by just a narrow way of thinking about a problem and how I can solve that as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting too, as you get older, your ideas can be challenged, but you've got the wisdom, I suppose, of all your past experiences to help you decide whether or not that's going to fit well for you, that challenging information or challenging ideas is going to fit well or not. And so I think that, when you were talking earlier about some people find it change difficult, that is true, definitely true. I think every person who's alive has experienced some difficulty with change, but I think the beauty of growing older too is just having that wisdom and that insight that you can look at things in a different way.
I think confidence is really important, like confidence that the experience and wisdom that you bring to a group is really valuable to others, really believing that. And that's come with me getting older. And I've seen it in the women I really look up to, that as they really step up and own the wisdom and the role that they play as an elder in their community or mentoring other people, that they have got so much to add to other people's lives in their thinking and their perspective and experience.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it, when we live in such an age of society? There are so many incredible role models that we've got with so much wisdom. Who are some of your, I was just thinking off the cuff there, who are some of your role models that you've got who are older women who you really look up to?
So recently it was my mother's 80th birthday, and we had a big family gathering here in Sydney. And I hadn't seen my aunt in quite a few years, mostly because of the pandemic and inability to be able to travel. But reconnecting with her was amazing, because my whole life she's inspired me and really believed in my creative talent. So she's an Oscar-winning documentary maker.
Hang on, you can't just drop that in. So what? What? That's amazing. So what has she done? Obviously, she can pick talent and she sees yours.
Yeah, she studied film when she was graduating from her arts degree in California. And I was actually there as a young child at her graduation. So I have seen how she's just gone from strength to strength in her career, and how she's really stuck at what she's passionate about, which is storytelling through documentary making. And whilst it would have been tempting for her to work on Hollywood feature films, she's always chosen to tell the stories of people whose stories haven't yet been told in the form of film and documentary making. So she's gone on now to share her wisdom around how to create amazing documentaries, and she teaches and leads a program around filmmaking, documentary filmmaking in Hong Kong now.
Wow.
Oh, well, certainly yes. So she sounds like an amazing role model. Who else is someone that you look up to?
Also, the other person would be, surprisingly, my son. So my son is doing his HSC this year.
Yeah.
But the simplicity in his thinking and just his straightforward way of problem solving is how I would love to be, because it's very clear. We often will talk about things that are on my mind, particularly when it comes to business decisions I need to make about my business. And usually with his strategic head, he's able to just look at it very simply and look at the essence of what I care for and I guess what I'm good at and what would make sense to do in the short and the long term. So I think that's an incredible skill to have. So I really look up to him and really respect that he brings that to my life.
Oh, is that like, have you told him that?
I need to tell him in more words and more often.
Yeah. End of year card that you can give him.
Yes. Well, it's his birthday coming up. He's turning 18 next month. So I think I need to do some kind of video message that brings the passion through and also, as you say, write him a nice long card.
Yeah, that's lovely. It's an incredible time, isn't it, when you're seeing your children growing up and the type of adults that you know they're going to become and what they're going to be able to add to the world. That's really special as a parent.
Yeah. I've only got one son, one
Yep.
child,
Yep.
and we have a really close relationship that's really special. And his relationship with my husband, Stefan, is also very special, but very different. So our way of connecting is we train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu several times a week together.
Oh, wow.
And so we have that physical bonding and connection. And also when we're driving there and back, we also get to catch up and talk about what's going on in each other's lives.
Oh, how lovely. And is he going to be remaining in Sydney once he finishes his HSC or?
I think so. I really encourage him to do something like what I did in terms of going on a gap year. So I would love him to do that, but it probably comes down to what he's comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, exciting times ahead for you as a family as well. So
Yeah.
tell us more about your work in creating social change for midlife and older women. What does that actually look like?
For me, it involves working with lots of different organisations, whether they're business leaders who have a workforce where they're really prioritising the needs of diverse groups, including midlife women and older. There's been a national conversation that has been sparked over the last year about this midlife phase of women, particularly around the change, i.e. the menopause, and how does it impact our lives and how organisations need to support women going through menopause, and particularly those who are in that 10% who have such severe menopausal symptoms that they actually have to leave the workplace. So I'm very focused with working with organisations that see the critical need in serving this segment as a market or a segment in their workplace that has quite different needs for a phase in their life and career. So that's one part of the work that I do. And then I'm also on a few advisory committees, which I really enjoy doing in terms of that collaboration with other leaders who are focused on similar causes that I'm interested in contributing to. So I guess that combination of being able to think and contribute long-term from a thought leadership perspective as an advisor, but then also there's the consulting work and doing speaking engagements and running workshops.
Right.
So I do a few different things.
You've got many hats by the sounds of it. Your hat rack must be full at home. Have you got or have you discovered that there's been a change in the way people and organisations, companies are beginning to look at this stage of their of life for their workforce?
Definitely. I think one of the recent services that I helped with the innovation of was working with Mercer, a multinational organisation that has a number of different parts of its offerings. And one of the services that I'm really proud to have contributed to is a service called Care and Living with Mercer. And it's an elder care support service. So the service recognises the needs of professional women who are in the sandwich generation. And now that our parents and older family members are leading longer lives, that also has an impact on women in Australia who might still be caring and have dependents from our children. But it's that, I guess, that struggle around trying to figure out, well, what's the right thing to do for older family members and supporting them right through that aging process. So I think it's one of those taboo subjects that in the workforce people don't necessarily feel comfortable about talking about. But there is increasingly more and more research to show that one of the reasons why certain people men and women have to drop out of the workforce is they need the time or they require the flexibility to be able to be there to support their aging family members. So there's increasing recognition around that. I mean, there's so many different challenges that women face when it comes to that midlife phase. And, part of it is the elder care responsibilities that land on our shoulders that we probably don't expect. And maybe our parents didn't necessarily have to go through that so extensively because lifespan in Australia has extended. And also the fact that our aged care system is just so complex, it's really quite overwhelming to deal with the challenges that we all face. And 8 out of 10 caregivers of people who've got elder care responsibilities tend to be women, and they're usually women in this midlife phase. So I feel really passionate about chipping away with all these different challenges along with organisations in terms of providing that support. So really care about the fact that we need to reverse this whole challenge we have around women who are faced with the gender gap when it comes to gender pay as well as the super gendered gap by the time we get to retirement age, and this growing issue of women over 50 who are facing homelessness.
Oh, there's a lot to unpack with all of that because you've raised a number of different topics. The number that you said 8 out of 10 the caregivers are women. Is that am I repeating that statistic back? So that's a huge impulse on women, isn't it? That you, as you said, you may not have expected or certainly thought about, and because most, a lot of the older people do, and rightly so, want to stay at home for as long as they can. And with that comes the support that's needed for them to be able to do that. And it's great that workplaces are now starting to recognise these sorts of issues and the fact that most of these issues fall on the shoulders of women.
Absolutely. And look, I wish it wasn't the case that it was so gendered because it just sets us back even more from a financial stability point of view. Yeah,
no, great to talk about. In fact, be something that we could talk about maybe in a later podcast, more of this in depth, because all the things that you've raised could really be separate episodes to go in more and to talk about.
And that's why it's really hard to try and unpack and figure out, well, what needs to be done, because it just intersects with so many different parts of the system and services that need to be morphed and adapted for the future.
For sure. Now, and I want to talk about some of your other talents that you've got and another one of your hats that you've got. In 2023, you became a published author with your book, The Art of Full-Time Living. Can you tell us a little bit about what that book's about and what led you to write the book?
Yeah, look, it was such a joyful process of writing my first published book. I wrote it for midlife women, and it came about because I guess I was thinking about all the insights that I'd gathered over the years from a combination of interviewing lots of people at different phases of their lives, in the second half of their lives, and including those who had defined a really beautiful, meaningful retirement per se.
So you've been really busy lately, Natalie, and I'd love to touch on 2 big events that you've been to. Firstly, your trip to Iceland. Tell us about that very special trip that you took.
Sure. So my Iceland trip was for three different purposes. One is I had postponed my celebration of my 50th. So I believe solo travel for women is really important in rediscovering themselves, reconnecting with, thinking about what's important to them, and meeting new people, because you only really get to do that when you're traveling on your own. So then that opened up for new experiences for me in terms of, one, I really wanted to go to a Icelandic writers retreat. So it's run every year around May timeframe, and I really want to go to that. And that was a 5-day part of my trip. And then before and after, the other thing that I did was I lined up a whole lot of interviews with change makers in Iceland, with the idea of interviewing people to understand why Iceland is number one in the world when it comes to gender equality. It's been number one for more than 14 years in a row. And also they're number 3 in terms of the happiness levels of society. So I thought that was a really interesting place for me to learn, well, what can Australia do in terms of accelerating the pace at which we can ensure that we close the gender pay gap, have greater gender equality, particularly for women as we enter the second half of our lives. So I was really intrigued as to what does it take to create change? And secondly, what are the experiences of Icelandic women who are in the second half of their lives? So went with my discovery hat on and lined up a whole lot of interviews with people, really interesting people who were very inspiring and shared a lot, were really generous. And when I have trips like that, it just it scrapes below the superficial level of tourism. And I guess it gives me purpose around really hyper-focusing on areas that I care about, to learn about people's cultures and how do they live differently and lead organisations differently to create change.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And so did you use your time at the writers' retreat, where the 5-day time that you spent, is that going to be writing about what you've discovered during your time there, or did you use that time for another idea that you've got?
So the Writers' Retreat, we were so busy with all kinds of workshops from these leading authors from around the world. So we didn't really have a lot of time to work on our own work. But for me, that was inspiring because I got to meet a whole lot of other writers who might have been novelists who've written like 4 or 5 published books, and best-selling authors, as well as people who are poets and write out of interest. So there was a whole range of different people, mostly women, who I guess have really lent into the craft of writing to express themselves, either for their own pleasure and expression or to get stories out there. And I think storytelling is so important if you are thinking about changing the world.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like an amazing time that you would have had to celebrate a belated 50th. Is that right?
Yeah. So, for me, celebration of life and also connecting with people and learning, all the things I think are really important to do every now and again.
Well done. Now, also in June of this month, you attended the Australian Senate inquiry into the topics of perimenopause and menopause. These are 2 really important topics, and we discuss these quite often on the podcast, and they're finally being recognised by our government. So what were some of your key takeaways from that inquiry?
Biggest takeaway is, look, there's so many systemic issues that need to be solved, not by one organisation or one leader. It's going to take the collective of all of us sharing all our personal experiences, because what's come out of it is it's menopause and perimenopause is still a taboo subject. So many women shared their lived experience around how they didn't realise what was going on in their bodies and their lives because no one had really openly talked about it with them. And it wasn't until it was almost too late that they realised what was happening, and then finding the medical support that they needed and the health advice that they needed to manage those symptoms. Like if we had more conversation, more awareness, and also the knowledge in our medical system and making some of the treatments more accessible, then that would help a lot of women who inevitably will reach this stage of life and experience perimenopause symptoms. And it will vary for each woman, but just at least having that awareness of what are the 100+ symptoms and what are the ways to treat it or reduce some of the symptoms. We need to understand it for ourselves, but then also make sure that the medical professionals, including GPs, are better informed and all the treatments are made more readily available, accessible and affordable. So we heard some of the evidence that was presented that we're just facing so many different blockers to receiving any of that in building awareness as well as accessible treatments, and also having employers who are having these inclusive workplaces that are creating a safe place for people to talk about. So if they need accommodations, if they're facing severe symptoms, to be able to tap into the flexibility that might be made available to them. So there's a few different things that need to be changed, some easier than others, but I think the more we talk about it and recognise this is a part of life for women, and men also play a role in helping understand and talk about it so that it normalises it as part of life. And it's not forever. That's the thing to note.
Yes. Are you quietly optimistic that there is going to be change coming from this inquiry?
I think so. Just for starters, the fact that everyone's talking about it a lot more, it's been widely reported over the last month, shows that there's appetite for people to now rethink what does it mean, because often it's women who are in senior leadership positions who are the ones who need to get that support while they go through it, because obviously employers don't necessarily want to see them leave. And it's not a permanent thing. So with the right treatment and accommodations, they can stay in the workforce. And we could buck that trend where currently we have the national average of women retiring at the age of 52 is 7 years younger than our male counterparts. And that also creates issues when it comes to having enough funds in our super. So it's also an economic issue that needs to be dealt with as well.
It is changing a lot of the mindset around it, isn't it, when we're talking about bigger organisations? Because I have heard on the other hand of people saying, well, if you're going to be shining a spotlight on this, it's just going to make it harder for women. And it's one of those things that has to be talked about. It's a life stage all women are going to go through. We can't ignore it because it happens. And we just need to be open and have that support network there. And I think it does start at a grassroots level. We're talking about it now. We're talking about it now in government and higher levels. But what's your opinion about that? Look, if we're shining the light on, it's just going to make it harder for women. Yeah, but we're being quiet. We're always quiet about it. And suddenly we've got a voice. What are you thinking? We should be quiet? We should be shining a light?
I've thought about it a lot, and it was definitely raised at the Sydney hearing where one of the senators said, look, it's just going to create bigger barriers by highlighting that this is a challenge that some women face, and it adds to the gendered ageism issues that we're already facing. I would say that what Thea O'Connor shared at the hearing, and she's a menopause expert who does a lot of work.
Podcast.
Right. Yeah. So how Thea basically talked about it at the Senate when she presented her evidence is that it's like how menopause right now as a topic is like how mental health was 15 years ago. So it was one of those things that was a taboo subject, but these days it's something that organisations recognise. Not only do we need to talk about it, but also provide the support programs and conversations and remove that stigma around the topic. So I think it's going to be the same thing because there are solutions. It's just really tapping into it, making it widely available and making people informed so that they recognise when it's happening, either to themselves or colleagues that they're working with or people they're managing.
It's a great example, isn't it, to have mental ill health or mental wellness this stage of life, menopause in the workplace as well, because they're obviously two very different things. But as you said, one was taboo a number of years ago, and now it's more openly accepted and dealt with in the workplace. And the same needs to happen for menopause.
I think it's actually really timely as well with the focus from employers on the psychosocial safety regulations, because if you start to look at each segment of the workplace, each employee group has different needs. And so if we really want to take this opportunity to create psychologically safe environments for this cohort of midlife women, it is looking at what are the physical needs and support as well as the psychological support of midlife women, creating that flexible environment and ways for people to engage with this phase in life and support them through it so that you can get the best of staff who are at this midlife phase where there's so many different changes that are occurring. Some of it is imposed on us, some of it might be more intentional.
Yeah. We're going to have some wrap-up questions now. What are you enjoying about this time of life, and what are you looking forward to in the future?
This phase in life, I'm really looking forward to more collaboration. Now that I'm confident that this is the best way to leverage my ADHD superpowers by collaboration, I am really open to working with lots of other people who are wanting to create change, create new services, a different way of supporting women through this midlife phase of life at work. There's so many different opportunities because I've done so much research into it. That's been my hyper focus. So just linking that with the innovation background, I think, look, we have to do this together, and the more we can amplify the conversation and bring great ideas of how do we innovate on workplace design as well as solutions for customer groups and how communities embrace positive aging. There's so much to be done. So I feel like I've got my work cut out for me for the next few decades.
Yeah, I love that. There's a lot to look forward to. What advice would you give to another midlife woman?
My advice is make sure you prioritize time to connect with others. It feels like it's a really busy time of life when there's so much you're juggling. But even if you prioritize one coffee catch up with someone, not necessarily about work, but just out of curiosity, because you want to learn something new and different, get to know someone different who's outside of your industry or work, just do that as an exercise to start with, and you'll be astounded by what comes out of that conversation. I think that's the place to start, because the more you do it, you build up a bit of a muscle and routine around looking after your social well-being.
Yeah, great advice. And our final question, Natalie, is what do you hope 80-year-old Natalie is going to say about current day Natalie?
80-year-old Nat, that's my mum's age right now. I hope she'll be able to look back to this stage and pat her on the back to say, good on you for making those dramatic changes and really stepping up and embracing, I guess, all the superpowers that recently she's learnt to really use and apply and work with others to amplify the work that she's doing.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm sure she will be saying that too. So, Natalie, well, I'll have all of the links to where people can connect with you, find out more about your book. That'll be in the show notes. But thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I've loved our conversation, and hopefully we'll have you back again and we can discuss some of those other bigger topics that we sort of just sailed over very quickly today.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I've just really enjoyed this chat, and hello to everyone, and please reach out to me for any listeners on the Redefining Midlife podcast. If you've got any conversations that you want to continue with me that we've started on this podcast.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Nat.
Thanks so much for listening and sharing your time with me today. I'd love you to hit subscribe on Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast app to keep spreading these empowering messages. Please share this podcast with other incredible midlife women in your world. Join me again next week for another redefining midlife conversation. Thanks again for tuning in.